Hey guys. Alright. Chilling with my St. Louis Cardinals because it is like sports jersey day, but I took mine off, sorry. So we are back on it. Chapter 29. For better or for worse. All the kings and queens left the charming kingdom the following day to celebrate the news of the enchantress's defeat with their people. Red was the only one who stayed behind, because at the end of the week, she, Froggy, Goldilocks, Jack, Bob, Charlotte, and the twins all attended Rumpelstiltskin's funeral. Hearing the news of his final act and what his last words had been was hard for the seven dwarfs to swallow, so he wanted to make sure that the ceremony was everything Rumpelstiltskin would have wanted. It was a small ceremony in the dwarf forest on the front lawn of the seven dwarfs' cottage. The dwarfs had made their brother a casket of glass and jewels from the mines, just as they had for Snow White. He was buried in a daisy-covered field not too far from the cottage. The dwarf said Rumpelstiltskin had spent a lot of their time there when he was younger, and he knew that he would have been happy to make his final place of rest. His tombstone read, "Here lies Rumpelstiltskin, the eighth brother of a proud dwarf family." That night when they arrived back in the charming kingdom, King Chase and Queen Cinderella hosted a dinner to honor the twins and the others who had sailed on the Granny. Connor was seated at the table in the dining hall when a man sat next to him and started a conversation. "I'm looking forward to this," the man said. "I miss being part of the famous charming dinner parties." "Do I know you?" Connor asked him and gave the man kind of the side eye. "Connor, it's me," the man said. "It's Froggy." Connor shook his head and looked at the man again. He always forgot Froggy was actually human, but no matter what his physical form he took, he always had those same kind eyes. "Your grandmother changed me back as soon as we returned from the funeral," Froggy said. "And the funny thing is, I had grown so accustomed to being a frog, I had forgotten that she still had to change me back." "Do you miss anything about being a frog?" Connor had asked. "I do miss reaching the books at the top shelf without a ladder," he said. "One doesn't realize how useful frog legs can be when you lose them." A twinkle came to Froggy's eye. "Speaking of reading, I have something for you." He reached into his lapel and pulled out a rolled-up stack of parchments. "When we were setting up the camps for the trolls, I found these in the Granny's wreckage," Froggy said, and handed the parchments over to Connor. "My stories," Connor said. "I thought those were lost forever." "I must admit, I enjoyed them quite a bit," Froggy said. "You've got a real knack for storytelling, although I do have a few words of advice for you." "What's that?" Connor asked. "Never let Red read those," he said. "I thought it was very clever writing everyone as trolls, but she would have you executed if she read your interpretation of her." Connor chuckled and playfully punched Froggy's shoulder. "No, I'm serious," Froggy said. Connor gulped. And the others finally arrived and took their seats around the table. Jack and Goldilocks looked down timidly at all of the silverware, not knowing where to start with. Red entered the room and almost blinded everyone with the amount of jewelry she was wearing. Even for a formal dinner in the Charming Palace, Red was overdressed. Bob sat down across from Connor, looking unusually tense. "What's wrong, Bob?" Connor said. "You look like you're about to operate on the president." Alex cleared her throat to get Connor's attention. "He's going to propose to Mom tonight," Alex mouthed when her mom wasn't looking. "Oh," Connor mouthed back. Excitedly to Bob and to his sister. He gave Bob an unsubtle wink with a thumbs up. Of course he did. "Is everything all right, Connor?" Charlotte asked. Yes," Connor said. "I was really looking forward to the appetizers." Alex rolled her eyes at him. Charlotte studied her son suspiciously, afraid he was coming down with a cold. A footman presented a tray to Goldilocks with an envelope addressed to her on it. "A letter has come for you, madame," the footman said. "For me?" Goldilocks said. "I wonder what it could be." She opened the envelope and found a note inside. An amused but shocked grin came to her face. She wasn't sure how to feel about the news she received. "What is it?" Jack asked her. "It's a note from the Red Riding Hood castle stables," Goldilocks said. "Porridge is pregnant." Remember, that's her horse. That's kind of funny. Jack and the twins couldn't contain themselves. Each laughed harder than the next. "Buckle," the twins said together. "I knew there was something going on between them," Connor said. The dinner began and the room was served course after course of the best foods the twins had ever eaten. Just before the desserts were brought out, Bob tapped the side of the glass with a spoon and got the room's attention. Alex and Connor shot looks at each other. This was it. I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me here tonight, Bob said. I'm fairly new to this Bailey clan, so learning about all of you and coming into this world has been, well, the adventure of my life. And seeing that's okay. And seeing that I happen to be in a room filled with people who make up the greatest love stories ever told, I would like to take this moment for all of its worth. Charlotte looked back and forth between the twins, and seeing that they knew what Bob was up to, they purposely avoided her eyes, wanting Bob to surprise her fully. He got down on one knee and presented the ring to her. Charlotte, will you make me the happiest man in the world, both worlds, and be my wife? Tears instantly filled Charlotte's surprised eyes. I, she said. Everyone in the dining hall was on the edge of their seat. Yes, I would love nothing more. Bob put the ring on Charlotte's finger and hugged her. Alex began to cry, which made Connor's eyes start to water, which ultimately caused everyone else in the room to well up too. It was a picturesque moment, even by fairy tale standards. You guys should get married in the palace, Cinderella said from the far end of the table. What? Charlotte asked, not believing her ears. Please, we insist, Cinderella said, and took King Chance's hand in hers. We've been trying to think of a way to thank you for taking care of Hope when you were being held by the Enchantress. It would be our pleasure. Charlotte didn't know what to say. She was stunned by the offer. That is so kind, but I'm not sure I could ever... Mom, Alex interrupted her. Speaking on behalf of every woman who has ever lived in the other world, you cannot turn down the offer to have an actual fairy tale wedding. I have to agree. It would be pretty cool, Connor said. Charlotte shrugged. The decision was basically made for her. Well, all right then. I would be honored. Thank you. We have to get back to our jobs in the other world, but I suppose we could have a quick wedding with our friends here and then have another one for our friends back home. Everyone raised their glasses to toast Charlotte and Bob. May you live happily ever after, the fairy godmother said. Red tapped her glass and stood at her seat. No one could look directly at her because of the light reflecting off of her diamonds. I would like to add to the celebration with some wonderful news of my own, she said. After speaking with the fairies and all the other kings and queens, I would like to announce that the Happily Ever After Assembly has decided to pardon Jack and Goldilocks for all of their crimes and waive all warrants for their arrest as a thank you for their daring and valiant efforts in defeating the Enchantress. The room burst into applause and congratulations for the couple. However, Jack and Goldilocks looked the least excited of all. Wonderful, Goldilocks said through a pained smile. Cheers, Jack said, reluctantly raising his glass to the others toasting them. You can move back into your old house, Jack, Red said, which is going to be really convenient because I've decided to build my country home right beside it. Jack and Goldilocks did their best to look as if it was good news, and it excited them. Red went on and on about all the wonderful double dates that they could have with her and Froggy and all of the activities that they could do now that they would do as they were neighbors. Goldilocks leaned in towards Jack. Well, at least I don't have to feel guilty about making you live the life of an outlaw anymore, she said. No more running from soldiers or close encounters with ogres or sneaking into shops to steal food or sleeping under the stars in dangerous forests, Jack said. It's tempting to live a quieter life, Goldilocks said half-heartedly. Just imagine us living the rest of our days in our manor, watching the grass grow with Red and Charlie. Jack and Goldilocks smirked at each other, both thinking the same thing. They couldn't imagine a worser fate. Goldilocks whispered something into Jack's ear, and a big grin appeared on his face. The twins looked at each other, knowing something was up. Goldilocks stood from the table and walked over to Red. She endearingly wrapped her arms around her old nemesis and gave her a big hug. What's this all about? Red said. I just wanted to thank you, Goldilocks said. What you've done for us is so generous. We'll never be able to repay you. Red looked like she was about to cry. You're so welcome, she said. Even though we've all both tried to kill each other, I tricked you into going into a house with 3 furious bears. You tried to throw me into a bottomless pit. I would like it very much if we could put that aside and let our friendship bloom even more. Goldilocks smiled at her. I think that's a wonderful idea, Red, she said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to step out for the moment. Goldilocks gave Red another hug and excused herself from the dining room. The dessert was finally served, and Connor looked up and down the table to make sure his piece of cake wasn't any smaller than the rest of theirs. Hey, that's not fair. Red got 2 pieces of... Connor stopped himself mid-complaint. Something was different. He was looking at Red without squinting. Hey, Red, where's your necklace? My necklace? Red asked. She reached up to her neck and screamed when she discovered her diamond necklace was missing. That doesn't make any sense. How could it possibly have vanished? Goldilocks! Sorry. Both the twins turned to Jack. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, trying to hide the giant grin underneath it. Sir Lambton suddenly rushed into the dining room. He had built up a reputation of constantly bringing such awful news these last days. The entire room went silent to hear what he had to say. Yes, Sir Lambton? King Chase asked. Pardon my intrusion, Your Majesty, Lambton said, but with all due respect, did you give Goldilocks permission to take one of the horses from the stable, or has one just been stolen? Everyone's eyes immediately darted to Jack. Well, that's my cue, he said, and stood up from the table. Alex and Connor, it was wonderful to see you again, and I'd like to thank everyone else for a lovely evening and a wonderful dinner. Good night. With that, Jack ran down the dining hall and jumped out of the closest window. Red leaped from the table and ran over to the window. Froggy and the twins followed her and peeped through it. They arrived just in time to see Jack sliding down the slanted roof and landing perfectly on the back of a horse that Goldilocks held the reins of on the ground. They both waved up at Red, Froggy, and the twins. Red's necklace sparkled in the moonlight on Goldilocks' neck. That's my necklace, Red yelled. Bring that back to me at once. Goldilocks yanked on the reins, and she and Jack rode off into the night. Happy outlaws once again. Red slammed her hands on the windowsill. I cannot believe I wasted an ounce of generosity on that woman, she yelled. Sir Lambton, I want you to put a team of your finest men together and go after her at once. This girl is funny. But I don't work for you, Lambton said. No excuses, Lambton. Find them, Red demanded. Lambton looked at King Chase and Cinderella. They both shrugged. Right away, King Red, Lambton said with a sigh and left the room. Alex, Connor, and Froggy couldn't help but laugh as they watched their friends ride off into the night. Much as it distressed Red, they were happy to see that Jack and Goldilocks returned to their own habitat. All right. Charlotte and Bob's wedding was just 2 days later. The entire palace was decorated in flowers and giant banners. Bells rang throughout the entire kingdom. In charming tradition, the twins' grandmother transformed their mother's nursing scrubs into a beautiful white gown and veil. Alex and Connor had never seen her look so beautiful, and both knew or grew a little misty-eyed because of it. I'm losing my blanket here. They were so happy to see their mom getting the wedding that she deserved. The ceremony was held, let me see, sorry guys. Was held in the ballroom, and it was crowded with, and it was so crowded the twins thought the entire charming kingdom must have shown up. The fairy godmother conducted the ceremony herself. Princess Hope was led down the aisle by her mother and acted as a flower girl. Connor was Bob's best man, and Alex was her mother's maid of honor. That's so cute. Do you, Charlotte, take this man to be your husband? The fairy godmother asked. I do, Charlotte said. And do you, Robert, take this woman to be your wife? I do, Bob said. The vows were interrupted only once as Red loudly blew her nose from the seats, overcome by the ceremony and still upsetting at losing her favorite necklace. By the power invested in me by the happily ever after assembly, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The fairy godmother happily called out, You may now kiss the bride. Oh dear. The twins both turned their heads the other way, and the crowd cheered. Bob, Charlotte, and the twins then got into a carriage the shape of a pumpkin and rode through the charming kingdom streets, waving at all the well-wishers that had gathered there. I think this family is off to a good start, Connor said. That evening, as soon as all the festivities were over, the fairy council met the fairy godmother at the charming palace. They were there on official council business and called together a meeting so exclusive no one but the fairies was allowed to be part of it. The fairy godmother waved her wand and made a door appear that led into the other world, and she and the other fairies waited for Mother Goose to arrive so that the meeting could start. Mother Goose eventually emerged through the door, dragging her basket of a suitcase and a very defiant and reluctant Lester with her. "Come on, Lester," she said. "I know you love the slot machines, but we can't stay in Vegas forever." If her appearance was any indication, Mother Goose had done a lot of traveling in the past week. She had worn a large sombrero that said Tijuana across it, a colorful Hawaiian lei around her neck, a large "I Love New York" t-shirt, and wooden Dutch shoes. A foam finger from a football game was still over her hand. "Looks like you were busy. O.M. goodness," Connor said. "Hey, Sea Dog, just because you and your sister saved the world doesn't mean you get to be sassy," Mother Goose snapped at him. "I was afraid the Enchantress was going to cross into the other world, so I went to all my favorite places before she could destroy them." Alex looked over her worldly outfit. "I see you went to Mexico, New York, Hawaii, and a football game? But where are the shoes from?" "Amsterdam," Mother Goose said. "They love me over there." "I didn't know nursery rhymes were popular in Amsterdam," Connor said. "They're not," Mother Goose said. "They didn't know me as Mother Goose. They know me in their nickname. They know me because they have their own nickname for me when I visit." "What's that?" Alex asked. "Mother Mayhem," she said. The twins just nodded, not wanting to know any details. "All right, let's get this hen in the oven," Mother Goose said, and clapped her hands. She followed the fairy council into the private drawing room. It's about time you showed up," Tangerina said. "Mind your beeswax, Tangy." This girl is funny. Mother Goose said, "No, I'm serious. Your bees are getting that crap all over the floor." The fairy shut the door tightly behind them. Naturally, the twins placed their ears up to the door and tried to eavesdrop as much as possible. "The world is still in shambles," the twins heard Esmeralda, voice fade in and out. "We're slowly clearing the eastern kingdom of all the thorn bushes and vines. The northern kingdom has finally rid itself of all the poison food, and Esmia's pillar of rock and dirt still needs to be removed. And there's no one that we've discussed yet involved with you." "Oh, that involved you, sorry, Fairy Godmother." The twins looked at each other. Their curiosity consumed them both. "I'll be right back," Connor said. A few moments later, he returned with an empty glass from the palace kitchen. He handed one to Alex, and then they placed them on the door, up to their ears. They could hear what the fairy was saying more clearly now. Smart, huh? "You understand how difficult this is for my family, don't you?" they heard their grandmother say. "We're not proposing it be cruel. We're proposing it to be preventative," Skylene said. "If we don't do something, it'll only be a matter of time before someone else follows in the Enchantress's footsteps," Xanthos said. "In the end, it's your decision," Esmeralda said. "It's your gift. You were chosen to be the gatekeeper. We can only tell you what we think is best for both worlds." Alex and Connor looked at each other. "I understand," the grandmother said. "And if it's what the rest of you think is the right thing to do, I can't ignore that. I just don't know how I'm going to break the news to my grandchildren." You can take as much time as you need," Esmeralda said. The twins heard them start to come to open the door and ran down the hall so they couldn't be caught listening. Their curiosity ate them alive for the rest of the day. Was the news that their grandmother was going to have difficulty telling them? Why did it affect them and their ability to move between the worlds? The twins' imagination didn't do any favors as they thought about what the possibilities could be. Luckily, they weren't forced to suffer too long. That night after dinner, the fairy council called everyone in the ballroom to fill them in on what they had discussed. "I'm going to take some time before the world can fully recover from the damage, or it is going to take some time from the damage that the Enchantress caused," Esmeralda said. "Esmia may be gone, but the fact is, what she tried to accomplish still remains a possibility as long as the two worlds are joined." "So what are you saying?" Connor said. The fairy godmother closed her eyes, not wanting to see her grandchildren's faces when they heard it. "For the greater good of both worlds, we have decided to close the gateway between them," Esmeralda said. Alex felt like she was being told that her father was dead or her mother had been kidnapped all over again. Her stomach tightened and her heart beat at a rapid pace. She felt her palms go clammy and the rest of her body go numb. What? She asked breathlessly. How is it even possible? Connor asked. He also had an incredibly hard time processing the news. It's possible if we use our magic together, their grandmother regretfully told them. So what does that mean? Does that mean that we'll never be able to see you again? Connor asked. Their grandmother shook her head, happy to report one small consolation. I was able to convince the other fairies to supply us with a way to see each other, she said. She waved her wand and 2 long, square mirrors with golden frames appeared. We'll be able to see each other using these mirrors whenever we want. You just won't be able to travel between worlds? Connor asked. Their grandmother closed her eyes again, and she nodded her head. It was clearly almost as painful for her to tell them that as it was for them to hear it. Alex was shaking her head profusely, and tears began running down her face. No, Grandma, Alex pleaded. Please tell me it's not true. I'm afraid so, honey, Grandma said. Alex lost it completely and buried her head in her mother's side. She cried so hard she was practically silent except for her deep gasps of air. Charlotte tried to remain strong for her kids, but she was having a hard time keeping herself together, too. She knew what the news meant for them. And you're okay with this? Connor yelled. Tears spilled down from his own eyes. I hate it as much as you do, their grandmother had said. But to secure the safety of both worlds, we don't have another option. Connor could only get one word out of his next question. When? He asked, and his voice cracked as he fought back emotion. Tomorrow at dusk, his grandmother said, waging her own emotional battle inside. Alex couldn't stand to hear any more of it. She ran from the ballroom and headed up the stairs to her chambers, her hands covering her face as she went. Alex! Charlotte called out, but it was no use. Alex shut the door to her chambers behind her and collapsed on the floor. She cried and cried for hours. Hours and hours. She had lived through the fear of losing the fairy tale world so many times, and now it was real. It was actually being taken away from her. And of all the times, her greatest fear had been realized right after she learned how much potential she had to offer this world, right after she discovered she had the chance of being a future fairy godmother someday, right after her uncertain future had nearly been set. It would all be taken away from her. It felt like the land of stories had always been dangled in front of her and her brother, just like a taunting cat toy. Every time they thought they had finally grabbed hold of it, it slipped out of their grasp. She cried until her tear ducts dried up and she couldn't cry anymore. She lay on her bed and prayed that there would be some way out around this nightmare. A soft knock came at the door. Alex, can I come in? Charlotte asked from the other side. Sure, Alex said. Charlotte walked into the room and took a seat on the bed next to her devastated daughter. It's so unfair. Mom, she said. After everything we've been through, after everything we've seen, why does this have to be taken from us too? Charlotte rubbed her hand gently on Alex's knee. Alex sat up and looked at her mom. She was crying almost more than Alex had been. Why are you crying so much, Mom? Alex said. You're not losing anything. Charlotte smiled. Oh, but I am, honey. A year ago, when you and your brother first came back to this place, I knew that I had lost my little girl forever. I watched her grow sadder and sadder the more of the time she spent away from this place, and I knew there was nothing I could do more to help her because her heart belongs somewhere else. Mom, what are you talking about? Alex asked. Charlotte put her hand on Alex's face and looked up at her daughter through the tears in her eyes. I'm saying I'm not going to let you leave the place where you belong, she said. Oh boy. One more chapter, guys.